They wanted me to disappear quietly. They wanted me to smile at my sister's engagement party, toast her champagne flute, and pretend that I didn't notice how my mother looked through me like I was made of glass. I noticed. I've always noticed. My name is Nora. I'm 30. Most of my life, I believed that if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, caused trouble for no one, my family would eventually see me, really see me. Not as the one who left for Toronto at 22 with 2 suitcases and a student loan that took 6 years to pay down. Not as the one who missed Thanksgiving because flights from Ontario to Vancouver in November cost more than my monthly rent. Not as the one who chose a career in environmental consulting over law school, which my mother has referred to as that hobby for the better part of a decade. I believed that one day they would look at me and think, she turned out all right. That day never came. What came instead was a Tuesday afternoon in March, a phone call from my older brother and a message that changed everything. But I need to back up, because the endings doesn't make sense without the beginning, and the beginning starts with my sister's engagement. Her name is Fiona. She's 4 years older than me. She's always been my mother's favorite, and I say that without bitterness. At this point, it's just geography, just the shape of how things are. Fiona graduated from UBC Law. She married a man named Garrett who works in commercial real estate in West Vancouver, and she has a daughter named Lily, who my mother refers to as the light of my life in every Christmas card. Fiona is beautiful and accomplished, and I love her, genuinely, or at least I love the version of her that existed before she started seeing me the way my mother does. Through me, past me, like I'm a smudge on the window. When Fiona and Garrett announced their engagement 3 years ago, my mother threw them a party at the Yaletown waterfront restaurant where my parents had their anniversary dinner every year. I flew out from Toronto. I bought a dress I couldn't afford. I sat at a table with my aunt and my cousin and my uncle while my mother stood at the head of the room and gave a speech about Fiona that was 12 minutes long. I counted. I have the voice memo on my phone because I started recording at minute 4 when I realized she wasn't going to stop. She mentioned me once, at the very end. And of course our Nora is here too, all the way from Toronto. Polite applause. My uncle patted my hand. I smiled. I raised my glass. I told Fiona her ring was beautiful. On the flight home, I sat in the middle seat between a sleeping businessman and a woman with a baby, and I pressed my face against the seatback tray and I cried for the first part of the flight. Not because of the speech. Because of the way my mother looked at me afterward, pleased with herself, like she'd been generous. Like mentioning my name was a favor she'd done me. I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. I thought about how I'd spent the better part of a decade trying to matter to people who had already decided I didn't. I thought about the messages from my cousin, Fiona's side, my mother's sister's kid, a man named Blake who I'd grown up with and who now worked in finance and had never once in his adult life passed up an opportunity to remind me that I worked in trees, as he put it. He'd sent me a LinkedIn message once that said, and I am not exaggerating, "Hey Nora, let me know if you ever want to transition into something more stable. Happy to put in a word." I screenshot it. I put it in a folder on my phone called Later. I have a whole folder called Later. It started as a joke, something I did when I was frustrated and didn't want to say anything I'd regret. A screenshot here, a voicemail saved there. My mother calling in November, asking if I was doing okay financially, in a tone that suggested she already knew the answer and it was no. My father, kind, passive, conflict avoidant, saying nothing while she spoke. My brother, whose name is Reed and who is the only person in my family who has ever actually called to ask how I am, occasionally sending me texts that said things like, "Mom's been talking about you again, just a heads up, don't engage." Reed is 3 years younger than me and considerably more patient. Reed is the one who called me on that Tuesday in March. "Fiona's having the shower in May," he said. "Mom wants you to fly out. She's already asked me to tell you that if it's a money thing, she can help." I set my coffee mug down on my kitchen counter in my apartment in the Junction, small, warm, mine, and I looked out the window at the gray Toronto sky, and I breathed through my nose for a moment before I responded. "She said that. Yeah, she said that to you, knowing you'd tell me. Yeah, Nora, so she's offering me money to attend my own sister's bridal shower." There was a pause. "I think she means well." "I know she does," I said, and I did. That was maybe the worst part. My mother is not a villain. She's a woman who has a precise and immovable idea of what success looks like and what a daughter should be, and I simply do not fit either template. She's not cruel, she's just certain, and certainty in a person who loves you imperfectly is its own kind of damage. I told Reed I'd think about it. What I actually did was call my colleague Simone, who has been my closest friend since we met at a conference in Ottawa in 2019, and I said, "Can I tell you something that's going to sound unhinged?" And Simone said, "Obviously, yes." And I told her everything. Simone listened to the whole thing. The engagement party speech, the LinkedIn message from Blake, my mother's offer to fund my flight, the folder on my phone called later. When I finished, she was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Nora, what does your client list look like right now?" That was an unexpected question. I told her it was good. It was actually better than good. I'd spent the past 2 years building a client base in the infrastructure and resource sector, specifically around environment impact assessments for large-scale projects. I had 3 major contracts active. I was billing more per hour than I ever had. I was, by any reasonable professional measure, doing extremely well. I just hadn't told my family because I'd learned a long time ago that telling my family things gave them material. Simone made a sound. "So your mother thinks you're broke and struggling." I never said I was, but you never corrected her. I hadn't. I'd let the assumption sit there, comfortable for her, unchallenging for me. It was easier than explaining the reality, which was that the career she'd called a hobby had become something significant. The company I'd started 3 years ago, just me and a business license and a sub-desk in a co-working space on King West, had grown. I had 3 full-time staff now, an office, contracts with 2 provincial governments and 1 federal one. "Nora," Simone said slowly, "do you want to keep letting them think that?" I didn't answer right away. Here's the thing about the folder called later. I'd never actually thought about what later meant. I saved things reflexively, the way you save receipts you're not sure you'll need. But sitting in my kitchen with the gray Toronto sky outside my window and my sister's bridal shower looming in May, I thought about it clearly for the first time. Later meant something. I flew to Vancouver in May. I wore a dress that cost $400 and I told no one that. I brought a gift, a kitchen stand mixer, the good one, the one my mother had mentioned Fiona wanted, and I didn't put a card on it because I didn't know what to write. I sat at the bridal shower in my aunt's backyard in Kerrisdale, and I drank tea, and I ate little sandwiches, and I smiled, and I listened to my mother talk about the wedding venue they'd booked, a heritage estate on Salt Spring Island that was costing more than I made in my first 2 years of self-employment combined. At some point, my aunt asked me what I was up to these days. I said I was still doing environmental consulting. My aunt nodded in the polite way people nod when they've already moved on internally to the next thought. My cousin Blake, who had apparently been invited to the bridal shower because he and Fiona have always been close, leaned across the table and said, "Still saving the trees, Nora," with a smile that I have spent years translating, and it means, "We both know this isn't real work." I smiled back. I said, "Something like that." I went home on Sunday evening, I sat in the Uber to YVR, and I opened the folder on my phone called Later and I scrolled through it and something settled in my chest. Not anger, something quieter, clarity. I emailed my mother the following Thursday to say I would not be able to attend the wedding. She called that same night. The conversation was not long. "Fiona will be devastated," she said. "I'll call Fiona directly. What am I supposed to tell people?" "You can tell them I had a prior commitment." "Nora, what is going on with you?" It wasn't a question the way she said it. It was an accusation, gentle but precise. "What is going on with you?" Meaning, you're behaving in a way that does not serve the family and that requires explanation. I said, "Nothing's going on, Mum. I just can't be there." She said a few more things. I listened. I said goodnight. I hung up and sat in my apartment in the dark for a while, not sad exactly, but feeling the weight of something ending. My brother called the next day. "She's upset," he said. "I know. Are you okay?" "Yeah, I think so. Reed, do you ever feel like you've been playing a part for so long you forgot it was a part?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I know that feeling." The wedding was in August. I sent flowers and a card with a note that was careful and warm and true, that I loved my sister and wished her every happiness and that I was sorry I couldn't be there. I didn't explain further. Fiona texted back 3 days later, "Thanks for the flowers." That was all. I spent that August weekend in Muskoka with Simone and her husband and a group of friends, and we rented a cottage on a lake north of Gravenhurst, and I swam in cold, dark water and ate corn on the cob on a dock and watched the sun go down over Ontario and felt, for maybe the first time in years, uncomplicated. My mother didn't call for 6 weeks after the wedding. When she did, it was October, and there was a different quality to her voice. Something cautious under the surface. She asked how I was doing. I said fine. She asked about work. I said good. She said she'd been talking to my aunt who had a friend who worked in my industry. She'd mentioned my company name, just in passing, and this friend had apparently recognized it. She said they've worked with your firm, my mother said carefully. She said you had a contract with the provincial government. We do, I said. Silence. A few of them, actually, I said. More silence. Nora, why didn't you tell us? And here's where I want to be honest, because I've been honest about everything else. It wasn't revenge exactly, what I'd been doing. I hadn't planned a grand reveal, I hadn't architected anything. What I'd done was simply stop correcting the assumption and start building quietly, privately, in my own direction, the way I'd always done. The reveal happened on its own, the way things eventually do when you stop hiding them and also stop explaining them. You didn't ask, I said. I didn't mean it harshly, but I heard her inhale. That's not fair, she said. Mum, when was the last time you asked me about my work without it being a way of asking if I was okay financially? Another silence, longer this time. I do worry about you, she said, and her voice was different then, smaller. It was the first time in maybe years that she had sounded like someone who was uncertain. I know, I said, but I'm not the one who needs worrying about. 3 weeks after that conversation, I got a call from Reed. The family had properly found out, not through my mother's careful probing but through Blake, who had apparently done some research after the bridal shower comment had eaten at him. Blake had found a profile piece that ran in a trade publication in September. It mentioned my company's most recent contract, a federal assessment tied to a major infrastructure corridor in northern Ontario. The piece mentioned the value of the contract. Blake had sent it to a group chat I wasn't in. Reed read me some of the messages. My aunt saying she had no idea. My cousin saying good for her, I guess, with a period at the end that told you exactly how he meant it. My mother saying nothing, apparently, for several hours, and then, eventually, someone should reach out. My phone started getting messages. My aunt, warm and curious. Fiona, suddenly interested in getting dinner next time you're in Vancouver. Blake, who sent a LinkedIn connection request which I still haven't accepted. My mother called again, a different call than the October one, more purposeful, more organized, as if she'd decided how to approach this. I'd love for you to come home for Christmas, she said. We could have everyone. A real family Christmas. I said I'd think about it. What I was actually thinking about was the August weekend at the lake, the cold dark water, the dock, the uncomplicated feeling. I called Reed. What do you think she wants? I asked him. He sighed. I think she wants things to be normal. Normal like before, where I flew out twice a year and sat at tables and listened to speeches about Fiona and Flume. Nora, I'm not being bitter, I'm being accurate. He was quiet, then, yeah. Accurate, I can't go back to that, Reed. I know, I'm not saying I'm cutting anyone off. I'm not. But I'm also not going back to being the ghost at the table. So what are you going to do? I thought about it. I genuinely didn't know yet. What I knew was that the phone in my hand had messages from people who had never once in 10 years flown to Toronto to visit me, had never asked about my work with real curiosity, had never shown up when I needed showing up. I knew that the company my mother had called a hobby was now a real thing in the world, with staff and offices and contracts, and a reputation that had apparently finally reached Kerrisdale, British Columbia through the second-hand route of a business magazine. I knew that none of that had changed who they were. Only what they thought I could do for them. I went home for Christmas. I want to be clear about that. I went. I sat at the table. I watched my mother be warm in a way she hadn't been warm toward me since I was a child, attentive in a way that had not been available to me when I was struggling and small and needed it. I watched Fiona ask questions about my clients with the same bright interest she'd once applied exclusively to the wedding flowers. I watched Blake not make a single comment about trees. On Christmas Eve, my mother and I were in the kitchen alone. She was making the shortbread she makes every year and I was sitting at the counter drinking tea, and there was for a moment something almost like the relationship I'd wanted as a kid. Quiet. Domestic. Just us, she said, without looking up from the bowl. I'm sorry I didn't take your work seriously. I didn't say anything right away. I worried about you, she said. I didn't express it well. No, I agreed. You didn't. She looked up. Her eyes were wet. My mother does not cry easily, and I noted it the way you note something rare. I'm proud of you, she said. I should have said that a long time ago. Here's the honest thing, I needed to hear it. Even after everything. Even after the 12-minute speech and the offer to fund my flight, and the looks through me like I was glass. I needed to hear my mother say she was proud of me, and she said it, and it did something to me that I wasn't entirely prepared for. But here is also true. I accepted the words without giving back everything she was hoping they would unlock. I said thank you. I told her I appreciated it. I did not tell her the full scope of what I'd built, the newest contract, the expansion into Alberta, the conversation with a partner in Calgary who wanted to discuss a merger. I did not hand her the whole thing, because I'd learned something in that decade of building quietly. The things I shared with my mother became things she evaluated, and the things she evaluated she had opinions about, and the opinions had a way of making the things themselves feel smaller even when they were large. I'd built something large, and I was done making it feel small. On New Year's Day, I flew back to Toronto. Sitting at the gate at YVR, I opened my phone. I had a message from Blake. It said, "Great seeing you over Christmas. Would love to grab coffee next time I'm in Toronto, catch up properly." I looked at it for a long moment. I thought about the LinkedIn message, the tree comment, the group chat I wasn't in, the years of looking through me. I typed back, "Sure, let me know when you're in town." I didn't mean it as forgiveness. I didn't mean it as the closing of a door either. What I meant was that I could hold what had happened without letting it hold me. That I could sit in the same room as people who had once made me feel small and know, clearly and without performance, that I was not small. That the knowing was not about them. It had never been about them. The plane lifted off over the Pacific, banked north, turned east toward Ontario. I pressed my face to the window and watched Vancouver disappear below the clouds. No tears this time. Just the quiet hum of the engines, the flat gray sky, and somewhere below it the country I'd built my life inside of, city by city, contract by contract, in the space between who my family thought I was and who I had simply, stubbornly, become.